Hello, I'm here with Ed Kane, Professor of Finance at Boston College. Ed, thanks for being with us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Let me start by discussing the area of financial reform. You've been writing on this very, very eloquently. I want to know where you think we are since Lehman.
Well, we're almost back to the same place, except the procedures are different. But the strategies still work. People can still, at mega institutions, can extract subsidies for taking tail risks, destructive tail risks. And that's what we need to fix. There is a belief that we can just tweak the old regulatory system, make sure some more information is flowing, and that the net result of this will be that bankers will behave better in terms of what they take from the rest of us.
But we haven't really changed the incentive structure, so bankers are essentially behaving the same way as they were pre-2008.
That's right. If you define behavior very broadly, I mean, the techniques that have to be used to extract these subsidies are different, but the availability of the subsidies is. So what we've done is we've changed the rules, just like, say, basketball or football. You come up with a lot of new rules. You adapt to them each year as they change. So the adaptations come about because there is the incentive to take these destructive risks in order to game the safety net.
And how do you think it's changed, say, if I was a banker in 2007 versus a banker in the post-Dodd-Frank world? What would you say are the main differences today?
Well, the main differences are you can't use securitization the way you used to be able to, because people don't trust the credit rating organizations on these, and quite properly so, that they misbehave badly. So you can't quite do it that way, but and that the swaps have changed. The rules for the swaps are still unfolding, but there's a whole different network.
But my understanding with the swaps is, for example, that even though 85% of them are now customized, there's this small portion which are standardized, rather. There's a small portion which are customized. The bankers have resisted any attempt to standardize those because the margins are much higher. The lack of transparency makes it much easier for them to extract their profits and rents. And there seems to have been great resistance towards acting on those customized products.
Well, there's also the issue that people are used to doing things a certain way, the customers, the other side of the market, and they're somewhat puzzled by all of this. But it is unfolding. The banks are apt to take much of the swaps business abroad into clearinghouses that they will be partial owners of.
And these clearinghouses, where will they take it? Is this
London?
London, no.
Particularly London. We're setting up a system of rules that I think very much favors London. We begin by saying that we're going to substitute, this hasn't all been worked out yet, but this is where it's unfolding, that we're going to substitute the compliance with the British rules with the US rules. Well, compliance is not just a matter of rules, but of supervising the rules. And if, as in the last crisis, the U.S. is going to step up through Federal Reserve loans to save markets, to save liquidity, then we'll save London. So our taxpayers are still at stake. The banks that could be hurt badly by a mess in London, say as AIG was in 2008, the incentives are the same in government, the incentives are the same in the financial industry. It's to get strong enough, to build enough clout that people are afraid and make your firm complex enough that it seems administratively impossible as a matter of fact instead of theory.
Now the spin against that is that the Federal Reserve has worked very, very closely with the Bank of England, that the two of them have worked to standardize their rules, that this isn't really going to be a problem. But you suggest actually that they may not be on the same page.
Well, yes, the point I would make is to say at the beginning of the baseball season, which is where we are now, every team is a contender. Even
my beloved Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the stuff they send out. It's the same thing in football, basketball, every sport. And if you think of this as a game, which I think you should, between taxpayers, regulators, including politicians, and these very big financial institutions, the taxpayers are at a great disadvantage. The regulators are at a disadvantage as well. although they are partially in league with these big financial institutions because of the politics.
So simply saying, for example, if I'm a U.S. taxpayer, I might say, great, send your socially polluting activities over to London. That's not going to affect me. Let the Bank of England and the British regulatory authorities deal with it. But you're actually suggesting that it's still ultimately going to bounce back to the U.S. taxpayer.
Yes, because we're the only ones with the resources to really step up in a crisis. And so once you put all these debts on the books, all the loans from the Federal Reserve or whatever way they choose to package it. Like swaps, again, can provide money to central banks in other countries, and then they lend on to the financial institutions that are in trouble. So the Federal Reserve can say, oh, we can't lend directly to these institutions now, but they can lend indirectly.
They can indirectly, say through the swap facilities with the Bank of England would be one way. And so
that would be the easiest way.
And that seems to be the way they've been doing it recently, although the Federal Reserve has been taking a tremendous amount of political heat for that.
Yeah, well, I would say the Federal Reserve is trying to do good things. I think part of the problem in financial regulation and the cause of many financial crises is that institutions, central banks, say, and other regulatory agencies tend to believe in themselves. You know, they work hard, and I think that should be enough. But they don't recognize how hard it is to keep the top personnel who are on top of the markets to check out what is the latest avoidance.
Well, or if they're really good, they get poached by the private sector.
Well, that's exactly what I was getting to,
yeah.
Yes. And there's lots of cases that one can cite.
I was very struck, actually, by the comments of Mark Carney over the last several months. I mean, you would have thought that after the events of 2008 that there would be a bit more humility on the part of some of the central bankers. But he seems to be very, very confident that they've got the tools, that they can pilot their way through another crisis, and that somehow they will be able to manage that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, humility is not really a characteristic they look for in choosing a top central banker. You know, everybody before a game gives the notion of confidence. They want you to think, we're ready, we're prepared, we can deal with anything that comes our way. And it's wishful thinking of the worst kind, but we all.
But there does seem to be a philosophical change in the sense that you know, there was implicit criticism by Mark Carney of the approach his predecessor took. Mervyn King, I think, took a much more critical line about what the banks were doing. Carney seemed to suggest that that's just undermining confidence, that somehow we've got to work closely with the bankers, whereas, you know, in the old days, you're old enough to remember, say, McChesney, Martin, no offense, by the way.
No, I worked for him once.
Well, exactly. I remember I saw that in your bio. And also the old German-style Bundesbankers. I mean, we seem to be in a different world where, you know, central bankers are no longer working to, you know, to use that old expression, take away the punch bowl, but, you know, make sure that it's mixed just right so that people can drink comfortably while staying at the bar.
Well, people still feel in government that the recovery is weak and fragile. So they're afraid to affect confidence in the real economy. And so trying to get across the notion that we shouldn't worry about the financial institution anymore, the financial sector anymore, that's all whole is thought to contribute to that. But there's an awful lot of uncertainty about whether that's true. And you know, when I keep hearing top regulators talk about confidence and restoring confidence, I think of the word confidence game. You know, where it's
the
really
confidence fairy, as some people on Carney would call it, actually.
Yeah, scam. You know that you always want to have, especially in America, a can-do attitude. I mean, I think that applies in North America. Mark Carney coming out of Canada. Mm-hmm. Now, they did a great job in Canada by standing up to the politics of banking. In 1996, when so many of they were going to take four largest banks in Canada and convert them into two, merge into two. And the finance minister stood up and said, we couldn't handle this politically.
No, that's right. It was interesting that he swung against the tide and very markedly, whereas the prevailing trend at that time was towards more deregulation, bigger, more globalized banks is better. And now it seems that we're in a situation where ideally you'd like to have national banks for national regulators, but there is no political will to downsize the banks anymore.
Well, there may be. My suggestion, the easiest way to do this would be to prosecute a few of the worst bank holding companies in the United States for securities fraud. If you convicted them as felons, because we have a theory in the U.S. that corporations are persons, and the Supreme Court has declared that in another context, but you can't have it.
It's quite creative, and I'm not sure that Chief Justice Roberts had that in mind when that decision was made, but you might as well use it creatively, actually.
Yeah, so if you prosecuted them, they as convicted felons, these companies could no longer own subsidiaries in banking that are insured. They couldn't be broker-dealers in the securities industry. They couldn't be futures commission merchants.
Have you had any sense that any Attorney General or anyone from the Department of Justice is willing to take that approach? Because my sense is the likes of Eric Holder and indeed his former assistant, Lanny Breuer, suggested that we don't want to prosecute these guys. It'll undermine confidence and it'll create another financial crisis.
See, that brings us back to confidence. But what is really justified confidence?
The rule of law, you would have thought.
Yes. All it takes is a brave person.
Yeah.
And, we had hoped for a lot of bravery from President Obama when he was elected. It's still not too late. You could select one to just go after, or two or three. And this would be so much better than the tiny little fraud cases they're bringing. And it would change the whole future of the. And my point is that this is really a crime wave.
Yes.
These people are stealing from the ordinary taxpayer, and they do it through a government that says we're doing this for your best good, because otherwise the economy would fall apart. Well, the economy is first more resilient than they're willing to grant, and that uncertainty is the big enemy of recovery and investment.
Yeah.
So if they can get across the idea that rather than tolerating this circumvention of the law, I mean, if our traffic laws were enforced in the way that our financial regulations are enforced, we couldn't get across town.
And I often am amused by the notion that we're still treating this like a big casino. My point has always been, actually, that's unfair to the casinos, because the casinos actually do seem to have a firmer grip on regulation, and occasionally the house does lose and they don't expect a government bailout.
Yes, well, also the monitoring system they put is ideal.
Yeah.
That if they see somebody winning a lot, they have the cameras to go in and look. And they'll find the sleight of hand, they'll bring the person in, and they will change that person's incentives. And they'll keep him out of the casino if they can in the future.
So actually, financial casino would be a step up from what we've got now.
Would be a step up, yes, it would, because they're worried about the loss. The trouble is, the taxpayer loss is not being monitored directly.
Yeah.
They're taking the attitude, well, we can look at the capital position of banks. But when you actually, the capital means just the net worth. But that's an accounting number. And as you get in trouble, your accountants get more and more creative. And so you hide the shortage for a long time. So you can't really discriminate between a weak and a strong bank just by looking at their alleged capital. That's why we have bank examiners. But bank examiners are not keyed in on this, and the information system that is kept by the government is not keen.
Now, I remember, speaking about bank examiners, I remember seeing you speak a few years ago, I believe it was at the Levy conference, and you talked about the need for an elite shock troop of regulators that could deal with these kind of crises. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I believe that we don't go about recruiting our top regulators the way we should. That you are recruited for political connections. So when Ben Bernanke was reappointed as Fed chairman, he went to almost every senator's office and met with them personally. Well, that is not independence. That is not just saying, I got a job to do. And we certainly wouldn't want law enforcement officers, before writing a ticket, saying to call up and see who you knew and see what was all right with your senators.
Yeah, and it seems to me also that the Federal Reserve is not the right institution to be doing this. It struck me, for example, that the FDIC, particularly under Sheila Bair, took this much more seriously. But you know, if you listen to her accounts, she was constantly frustrated by both the Fed and Treasury when it came to dealing with this problem of getting tough on the banks.
Well, I've been saying for several years on this point that the FDIC is the only agency with the right incentives. They are accountable for the losses that go on through their insurance fund, the bank insurance fund. And so we need to set up an information system that establishes the broad qualitative effects, at least, of action, so that we know ex post. I understand it's going to be very hard to do it ex ante, but you can do some ex ante, but you just follow up, make them report. You know, one of the reforms of the Dodd-Frank Act was to make all the swaps trades be reported to data repositories. But the information is coming in with not even half filled out returns. You know, you can't do anything with the numbers.
And they keep stalling to hope that the regulations will be solvent.
No one actually has responsibility or the resources to follow up on these things and make people report them in a consistent and full way. And the agency that's closest to this, the CFTC,
they try very hard.
Is under-resourced beyond belief in terms of what the Dodd-Frank Act has put on them.
And Gary Gensler seemed to be a lone wolf just in terms of trying to introduce some serious rules of enforcement. I don't know, what's your sense of how successful he was? Because I guess he had nothing to lose. He was going to end up retiring by the end of the year anyway.
Well, I think it was more than that. I think he wanted to make an impact.
Yeah.
He really wanted to address this issue of substituted compliance, foreign subsidiaries of U.S. firms.
And he was greeted with a wholesale attack by all sorts of financial interests.
Everybody went against him, and you understand he was just a commissioner, one of 5 people, and while a commissioner is much more powerful, the head of an agency, the chairman, is much more powerful than the other commissioners, you still have to do deals, and ultimately, you know, that agency is very beholden to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, that pretty much they get what they want, even though, I mean, he proposed things they didn't want. But much of what he did in terms of substituted compliance and defining foreign subsidiaries of U.S. firms as U.S. persons, which under the Act would be looked at closely, monitored closely by the CFTC. That's going to be undone, I think. But even if it isn't, they don't have the resources to look closely. They can only give us a lick and a promise.
And the same thing seems to be the situation for the SEC as well.
Well, the SEC doesn't even have the incentives established about who they'll prosecute and who they won't. I don't understand their priorities at all. They aren't the ones that if I'm looking at for where taxpayers exposed. I mean, they seem more interested in investors. They don't seem to understand the systemic implications of, say, their prosecutorial policies.
All right, so going forward, we've passed Dodd-Frank. There is talk about doing some more, say, in the UK via the Vickery Commission recommendations. There's Basel III, although those have also been softened. What do you see as the future for financial reform to make our system safer? Is there anything positive out there?
Well, as I say, I have some ideas that I think are positive, and I'm sure other people do. I mean, another panel member is posing the idea of increasing capital requirements to really substantial levels, make them owe a lot of net worth, and that would help in the short run, but it wouldn't change the incentives to find ways to misrepresent capital, to soften them by continued...
And higher capital structures, I mean, really, to deal with the magnitude of the problems, you need something close to 20, 30%. And I think you've got that in places like Switzerland, but you don't really have any... I mean, I think just to get us up to 5% in the US is absolutely...
It's been very hard, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, even if you got it up, as soon as the economy looks strong again, people say, we don't need all this capital. And the FDIC is not politically strong enough to say, yes, you do. I mean, they can say it. As you said, Sheila Bair tried so very hard, but you know, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are a different level of public prestige and clout.
So to paraphrase Rahm Emanuel, we in a sense did let a good crisis go to waste, and perhaps we have to wait for the next one before we sort it out and get some of your ideas introduced.
Well, I don't know whether it's my ideas or anybody's, but just to sincerely address reform. What I believe we get here, crisis after crisis, is counterfeit reform.
Yeah.
And it sounds good, and when people that, you know, finance is complicated for people. You almost have to have a gift for it, just like baseball or basketball. And so if you don't have this gift, a lot of people just sort of, I don't understand this, and they pay somebody 2% a year to manage their assets.
The problem is that there's a sense that you need something of the magnitude of a crisis of the Great Depression to really get genuine banking reform.
I completely agree with that, but the trouble is that bankers get in there. They get first dibs, not just the bankers, but all the financial institutions. They work on the congressional committees. This is now the U.S.
Yep.
Work on the congressional committees. In other countries, it'd be in Parliament, but in the U.S., it's very effective in the congressional committees. And they end up getting things written into the law by them that are full of loopholes, and they know what the loopholes are, and they start preparing for them before the law has even been passed.
So 10% unemployment gets us Dodd-Frank, 25% unemployment gets us Glass-Steagall. That's the political dilemma.
And the other side of it is that after a few years of working it out and seeing what works and what doesn't, and then, but plus then the rules have to be made after the legislation has been passed. So you go in again, you push rules. If you don't like the rules that come out, you go to court. You sue them, and the chances are you may be able to roll them back. But CFTC is being sued on some of Gary Gensler's rules on the grounds that he didn't call them rules. He's interpreted them and said these are what the law says. And so he tried to take the law as his authority, but it was outside what are the procedures of the Administrative Procedures Act. And so there's a chance that these industry people may get all this thrown out.
So we've got several problems ahead still to deal with.
I would say we got the same problems.
On that depressing note, I think we'll have to end it. But I hope that it won't take another crisis to get some of your ideas introduced. But thanks very much for coming to talk to us today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.